Hi folks, this is just going to be a short getting started video with Mad Maps. We're just going to go through the steps of integrating Mad Maps into an existing Unity project. So let's take a look at what we've got here. We've got a terrain with a bunch of trees, splat maps, detail maps, pretty much everything. So the first thing that we want to do is select our terrain and add a terrain wrapper component. Now the terrain wrapper is where all our layers are going to live, and it's also where we're going to manage the splats and details. So Mad Maps takes over management of splats and details, whereas normally you edit them within the Unity inspector. It's important to remember to edit them instead within the Mad Maps interface. This is because Mad Maps, instead of defining the splat prototype in the terrain, we instead create scriptable objects that live in your project. And why we do this is to allow for different scenes and world stamps and roads to reference splats and detail prototypes with Unity object references. So what we want to do, first off, is set this up, and we can do this just by selecting the Splats tab, and you'll see a prompt down the bottom here that says you have X amount of splats on your terrain that are not currently handled with a wrapper, and this button to just fix now. So just hit this button and it'll bring up a prompt giving you three options. You want the middle option that says create new wrapper, and that'll give you a save file panel just to where to create the new scriptable object. And you'll do this for every splat prototype on your terrain. You'll be making a new scriptable object. So we can see now that we have three new assets in our project for each splat prototype with all the properties of the splat prototype. So it's important to remember that when you want to edit the properties of these splat or detail prototypes, that you do it through the scriptable object, and then you can just go back to the terrain, go back to the tab, relevant tab, splats or details, and hit this refresh button to reapply the properties of the scriptable object back to the terrain. So we're going to do this again for the details tab. It says you have two details on your terrain that are not currently handled with wrappers. We'll just fix now, and we'll do the same of just creating a new wrapper. Hitting that middle button for each new scriptable object. And you can see now that we have these two new assets in our project for each prototype. Okay, so now we're ready to capture all this information on the terrain into a new terrain layer. First we need to create a terrain layer, and we can do this just by hitting the plus button here and selecting terrain layer. The other option is procedural layers. We'll cover them a bit later. So we have our new layer now, and we can select it to see properties about it. So I'm going to rename it. I'm going to call it base. So we can see right now that there's no information in this layer. Everything's null or zero. So to capture all this information from the terrain, we just hit this button here, capture. And it'll give you a warning about clearing any existing data, but we don't care about that. You can see we've successfully captured the terrain. We can verify that all this information is correct just by hitting the I button next to all these different channels. So we'll just verify that the height map has been captured correctly. We'll open up this window called the Data Inspector. Hit Normalize Preview to make things a bit more visible. And we can see, yeah, the height map is captured correctly. You can also, for instance, look at the splat maps and verify those are captured correctly. You can cycle through all the different types of splats here. And yeah, looks like everything captured correctly. So just a note on the objects that we captured here. All these objects are prefabs, and Mad Maps can only work with prefabs. So if you want to capture objects into a terrain, it's important to remember that they do need to be prefabs. And you can see that we've captured our 282 rocks here. But so it's important to remember that these original rocks that we have now, we don't really need those anymore. So we need to disable our original objects or delete our original objects, because these objects now live in this layer. They live as these 282 objects here. So if we hit reapply all, which will take all of our layers, blend them and combine them and reapply them onto the terrain, we'll see that we'll get these rocks reappearing on our terrain under a new object called the Terrain1 object container here. So the object container contains all the objects that are managed by the terrain wrapper. And it's important to remember that these are managed objects. So if you make manual changes to anything in this hierarchy, the next time that you hit this reapply all button, those changes will be reverted. So keep that in mind. So we have successfully captured all the information on our existing terrain into a terrain layer. And that's pretty much it for getting started. We're now ready to make some stamps, stamp them on our terrain, even create a road maybe running through this terrain. And for more information on how to do that, check out the next videos. I'll put some annotations. And thank you for watching. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask on the Discord forum, the Unity forum, or just send me an email. I'll put links to all of those in the video description. And have fun creating.